This is Call with Dads, where we dive into the ups, downs, and everything in between when it comes to being a dad. Here, it's all about connecting with a community of dads who are committed to learning and leveling up as fathers. Welcome to Call with Dads. Let's talk.
So I'll be honest with you, I was excited when you said yes, mainly because as you know, I follow you online and try to get your message out a little bit here and there because I really like it. And let's do this. Do you want to get started? Because I'm going to start gushing over. Perfect. Because I was going to say, I'm going to start gushing over your book that I'm only halfway through. So the fact is like, I'm on chapter 7 or 8, I think it is now. And for anyone listening, this is John Finch, and this is me literally gushing over, getting partly through his book, The Father Effect. And John, you know, I'll be honest with you. I never once thought I had what I always call daddy issues or father issues or what so have you. My biological father and I never really close. I never even thought much about it. My stepdad was there. So to me, I had a father, all this stuff. And until I started reading your book and piecing together the things that connected with it, I realized how angry I kind of really was with my biological father. And seeing through some of the things that you said, because don't get me wrong, my biological father, he wasn't abusive to me. I know how he was with my mother and all this, and that's a whole nother story. But to me personally, he was just more, I don't care, do your thing. And it was more a political or a power grab when he tried to get custody of me. And I was well aware of that. And he didn't hide that fact with me. So reading your book, most guys, one thing you said is most guys don't realize that they have this father wound. And until I started following your pages online and reading your book and doing the videos, I never knew what a father effect was, what father wound was. And that's why I kind of really was looking forward to talking to you, and still am, because there's so much about this that most men, including me, and I don't know about Tom, that you don't think about the effects that your father has on you until you really sit down and look at it. So, John, before I really just do the whole interview talking you up, how about you talk a little bit about yourself, let people know your story if you don't mind, and then we can just go into our conversation about everything.
Yeah, so I'll kind of do the quick version of my story. When I was 11 years old, my dad committed suicide, and I had no idea the impact that would have on me for the rest of my life. As an 11-year-old, just kind of walking through life, you know, not having that father figure walk alongside me, showing me and telling me he loved me, he was proud of me, he believed in me, all the things that every young man needs. Because I didn't get that, I bought into everything that the world says is important, right? Success, money, power, all of those, all that nonsense that the lies that the world tells us. And so it got me into a lot of trouble. And as far as just bad mistakes, things I would do, I didn't get in trouble with the law or anything like that. I didn't go to jail, anything like that. But it made my life a lot more difficult, right? Because I didn't have that influence of a father. And so I did begin drinking when I was in high school, and that was an issue that would be an issue for most of my life. And so back when I was about 41 years old, about 15 years ago, I really had an experience. God just took me to this place of brokenness. There was a lot of things going on in my life, my health, that I was having health issues. My marriage I was a jerk and just wasn't a good husband. I wasn't the father I needed to be. And in a counseling session, you know, I was seeing this counselor, and he was talking, and it was kind of like one of those things in the movies or TV, right, where he's talking and your mind starts to go somewhere else. So you start having this conversation with yourself. And in that moment, it was as if God said, how could you be so bitter, resentful, and angry towards a man who didn't know how to be a father? And literally, for me, and every man's journey is different. It was in that moment that I found forgiveness for my dad. And up to that point, I'd been hearing all these stories and really looking to find out more about my father. And the more God showed me about my father, the more I realized he didn't have a chance. He didn't have a clue. I mean, he grew up with 5 different dads. His mom was married 5 times, and just a really brutal, tough life. And one thing that hit me, and this was the thing that was most important for me, and I think a message for everybody listening, is my dad couldn't give what he didn't have. And so simply that understanding and knowing more about my dad and the incredible life that he lived, just very difficult, it connected the dots for me. And now, who I used to refer to as a coward and an SOB, and I mean, I called my dad all kinds of names. Now I look at him, towards him, with love and compassion, because I just see that he was lucky to make it to 42 years old, right? When he killed himself. God just gave me a different perspective. And I think he showed me that we were probably more like brothers than we were son and father, because we were both so jacked up, flawed, and imperfect, and still am. I don't have all the answers at all, but it's by the grace of God that in his forgiveness and love and compassion that I've gotten a second chance to be the man, husband, and father he created me to be.
It seemed like when I was watching the movie, like you had this point of realization too, where you mentioned multiple times feeling like, your father committing suicide was a result of you being a bad son. I'm paraphrasing, but something to that degree, right? And then it seemed like you had a point in time where you kind of realized that your father had his own story. And in fact, he was committing suicide to escape going back to jail, right? Because of his counterfeiting charges. And how did that realization impact you, especially as an older man?
Yeah. So, here I'm 41 years old, and I'm starting to hear this story for the first time. I had no idea that we went into witness protection program and that all these things, I mean, it was like mind blowing, right? I was asking my mom, like, wait, is my last name Finch?
Because when you were young, you said you didn't want to know anything about him, right?
Right. Yeah. I was
an
angry, ticked off dude, right? Because I was so mad that I couldn't get my head around how a man could do what he did and leave his family, right? His wife and 3 young sons. I couldn't get my head around it. And I had found the gun that he did it with 2 weeks prior to him doing it. I was playing around his closet, and like young boys would do, right? And I came across this gun. I was like, wow, this is cool. And then within 10, 15 seconds, I hear this voice up over the top of me, and he's just like, son, don't you ever tell anybody you found this, and I get out of here. And so I had all that guilt and shame of if I would have said something. And us as young kids, we have these wild ways that we think about stuff. And so there was a part of me that's like, man, if I would have told somebody about the gun, would he still be here? Maybe he left because it was something I did, right? There was all this shame and guilt and unworthiness that I was already dealing with because he abandoned me, because he left me. But there was all the other stuff kind of stacked on top of it. So yeah, I was a pretty angry dude, and that anger played itself out in so many ways that I had no idea, it would. And that was a big part of what I've seen and realized over the last many years in doing this, is there's a lot of ticked off, angry guys, and they can't even tell you why they're angry.
Yeah.
Well, I honestly could say that I had, until I started becoming a father myself and started forgiving, okay, well, my father, he was this, but I have to focus on my kids and kind of working through that. And like I said, I had no idea father issues whatsoever, but I knew that I wasn't happy with them. I personally had a ton of anger, and I could say, yeah, it makes sense that would cause quite a bit of anger. And one thing I read in your book so far has been that you were going out even when you were married and you had a good life. From what you said, it still affected you with the drinking and running up bar bills and doing all these crazy things. and then just being kind of dead to the world, to your family when you got around them.
Yeah, that the big part for me, and we talk about it in the movie, I think in the book, is I had this wound, this father wound, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I didn't have healing for, and it was a major issue. It was like a thorn in me, and it was coming out in all these different ways. My relationship with my wife, my kids, all the anger. It was coming out in ways I didn't even know about, right? Until I sat back and reflected and looked, and after the fact, once I found healing and forgiveness. But it was like I was medicating, right? Because I didn't want to feel nothing toward my dad. And because it was so much a big part of my life, and the residual effect of this anger and unworthiness and guilt and shame and everything else, I just wanted to stay medicated. So my medication was alcohol. If I could stay drunk, then I didn't have to feel, and I didn't have to face the real issue of what I really needed to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So I'll this is maybe long-winded. I'll try to be brief about it, but I had several aha moments when I was watching the movie, because I've never really contemplated my own father's story and how his wounds affected me. Just like Eric was saying, the idea of a father wound never really crossed my mind. My father was abandoned at 5 years old. His dad disappeared, never to be seen again until he was in his 20s. My grandmother remarried. He was, as good of a stepfather as he could be, but unfortunately a stepfather is not a father, right? So when I was 16, my dad actually, just to be brief, he disappeared one day. So my mom, I wasn't able to get a hold of him all day. My mom called me about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was home from school. She said, have you talked to your dad today? No, I haven't talked to him. Half hour later, she called me back, sounded frantic. She asked me to go to the bedroom, to my father's closet. They had a walk-in closet, and I walked in, and half the closet was empty. The stuff was gone. And what prompted her to ask me to do this was the fact that half the money in the savings account was gone. So it was a whole ordeal. So the realization for me, and this was many years ago, but just like you said, that stuff kind of, it never really goes away. And the realizations for me was when you made the comment about that ride from the school to your home with the preacher, and you made the comment about that half mile feeling like 100. I remember being at home and waiting for my mother to come home, and it was 10 minutes, but it felt like hours, and just being in that moment and contemplating all the things that a young man would contemplate in that situation, very similar to the stuff you described, right? Why would he do this to me? What did I do wrong, right? And then you made the comment about, actually, you didn't make this comment. It was a quote from another individual that spoke in the movie, and I don't remember his name, but I'm paraphrasing, but he made the contrast between crying from your father's wounds as opposed to crying for your father's wounds. And that was a huge moment for me, because I was like, wow, that's a big transition. I feel like that's almost the integral transition in the healing process when it comes to these father wounds. And then also subsequently, that puts on our shoulders as fathers the responsibility to ensure that our children do not cry from our wounds, but they cry for our wounds, right? So what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, Gordon Dalby. He's actually out
yes.
on the West Coast. Yeah, and I think it is, dude, I might be getting it backwards, but I think it's a young boy cries for his father's wounds. A man cries from his father's wounds. Wait, you might correct me on that.
Yeah.
Remember it now.
It's okay.
It is great.
I just remember the contrast being so powerful. I don't remember the exact quote, but I remember the two contrasting ideas. I was like, wow, like this just kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, and you know what? The thing is, I love these kind of conversations, because most of us men, matter of fact, I'll tell you another quick story from Gordon Dalby. Great story where he goes and shares this thing with me. He says, John, I travel all over the world and speak to men. And I just released a clip on our YouTube video about the saying, stop crying or I will give you something to cry about, right? There's many of us that grew up with that. And so as fathers, what we're doing, we're telling our young sons, don't cry. You better not cry. So we're showing them and telling them not to be real about their emotions, right? He talks about the young sons, the 5, 6-year-olds on the soccer field. They fall down, they start crying. We get up, buddy. You're okay. Suck it up, man up. Whatever, we tell them all these things. So at a very young age, we're telling young boys not to be real. And then we wonder why we have communication issues with our wives and with our job bosses and everything else, because we've been taught at a very young age not to be real. So this father wound plays itself out in so many different ways. And I had no idea when I first started this. I just saw it play out in my own life. I found forgiveness from my dad. It radically changed my life. And I thought, I got to go start talking to other people. And everybody I talked to also had a story. And the majority of them were not very positive. A lot of them had happy endings in the sense that they had found forgiveness for their dad, but most stories weren't the best. And so that's when it hit me. It's like, wow, we gotta make a movie and show other dads these stories, other people's stories, try to encourage them through all of this and help them know, first and foremost, they're not alone. Because I think most men think that we're all alone. We're the only ones struggling with it. We're only jacked up, screwed up guys. Everybody else has it figured out, whether it's marriage, family, fatherhood, whatever. And in reality, none of us have it figured out, right? We just don't. We're imperfect, flawed guys. And it's because of our parents and the generational thing that happens a lot. And, it's funny. I talk to young men and various people all the time. And yeah, this has happened more than one time. There'll be a young guy and he's struggling with alcohol. And we start talking. And I said, dude, did your dad struggle with alcohol and all? He goes, you know what? Yeah, my dad liked to drink. What was your grandfather like? Well, now that you mention it, my grandfather really loved to drink too. Yeah. And they don't realize that it is a generational thing, right? What we're doing in our homes is what our kids will believe is normal. And people's normals aren't the same. We interviewed a prison inmate in Houston, Jose. He's in the movie. And he talked about his interview. He talked about, 11, 12 years old, his mom would send him down the street to grab his drunk dad out of the bar. And he said, I'd get my dad back to the house and I'd sit there and watch him drunkenly beat my mom. And he said, John, you know what? When I became 16 years old, at an age where I thought I was a man, guess what I started to do? I started getting drunk and beating my mom because that's what I saw my dad do. And I thought that was what men do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the things that we pass on is like, I know when I was younger, with using my own dad as an example, my dad was very big into drugs, very big into drinking. And when I was younger, I drank, I smoked weed. That was about the extent that I did. But I found out as I aged and I talked with some of the guys that my father related with when he was doing drugs, that he did some drugs I would have never even thought about touching. And he was a very get high, do some very bad things. And then by the grace of God, I will say I didn't follow in his footsteps. And I think the divorce that my mom did when I was at a younger age and my stepdad stepping in allowed me to have that break from that kind of ritual. So I will say that the fact that there was that father wound, not having my dad around me and seeing him that way, and my stepdad to kind of show me how a real man kind of acts was a big part to help me be better. So I rather honestly have had that kind of father wound that way and be able to see the positive way of being. But yeah, it's generational. Like, don't get me wrong, I'll still have a couple beers every now and then. I make my own homemade wine, and it's the cheapest Christmas gift I can give away to people. But
well, you are in Virginia, in Kentucky. I mean, moonshining is pretty much a regular thing over there, right?
I believe so. So, hey, trust me, as long as the government doesn't ask, I don't tell.
But there was redemption for you, and well, for me as well, to a
Yeah.
degree, because my dad did come back. I didn't finish the story. My dad did
Oh,
come back,
sorry.
but no, I just realized I didn't. That's a kind of an important point. But yeah, I made a post the other day talking about, how something even more valuable than generational wealth are generational values, and there's like, when some people don't have, there's that breaking point, like it seems like all of us had at some point, and then there's no continuation beyond that, right? So I don't recall from your story, John, that you lost your father at 11. Was there a stepfather that stepped in and took over and kind of picked up the baggage there, or?
No, my mom never remarried, only dated probably a couple of times ever, not for very long. My older brother tried to kind of step in and be a father figure, but he was still a brother. So, I think
Fun.
there was another really part of my anger too. I think deep down in my subconscious, I was ticked that no other man was stepping in the gap, right? Was filling in the gap. And so, and there were men, coaches played a huge part of my life, and were influencing me as best they could for those brief amount of periods at school or whatever else, right? But I never really had that one guy step in. And so I think it's wild to look back, because I think I pieced together what I thought a man, husband, and father should be like by looking at my friends' dads and kind of trying to pull the little good that I saw. And sometimes what I thought was good wasn't good.
Right.
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 But I would piece together what I thought a man was supposed to be, and then I would try to be that. And so not having that clear voice of direction in my life telling me, no, son, that's not good, or yes, do this, or, again, showing me, telling me, that's where I lost. And I was very confused as a young man. And that's what I think caused a lot of confusion in my life. And I look back and at the college age kids in my life in college, and I think, man, if I would have known something like this in college, or would have been given this idea, or showed this idea of a father wound and the forgiveness and healing and all the incredible things from that, if I'd have known that and done something about it in college, it may have taken my life down a whole nother path, right? And so there's so much to it. From the generational thing, there was the victim mentality too. I loved living as a victim,
Right.
because then I could justify my drinking. You don't know what I've been through. You never walked in my shoes, so I can continue to get drunk and not really be accountable and responsible for my actions, because I could be a victim. And that's a major issue we have across the world, I think, especially in this country.
Yeah.
And I feel I want to I'll talk on that for a second, because I feel like that is an extremely important point in this process when it comes to, healing, progressing away from the father wound, is that it's important that we talk about the father wound, and it's important that we talk about the impact that it has on people, but that does not excuse anybody's actions, right, in relation to that wound. So yes, it's important to realize what your father has done, the wounds that he had, how it affected his behavior, how your father wounds affect your own behavior. But then another really important piece in that realization is that there comes a point in time, and I don't mean to sound, not sympathetic, but there comes a point in time in that process where you have to take responsibility for your own actions and not use your father wound as a crutch. Right?
No, absolutely. And I think every man needs to hear that message, right? We've got to, I used this phrase a while ago, man up.
Yeah.
And you've got to, at some point, realize that you can no longer blame your dad. You can no longer blame all the other stuff you want to blame. You've got to step up and do the right thing.
Right.
Take action.
Right.
To whether that's start this journey to find forgiveness for your dad. Let's figure this thing out. Right. Yeah. Go to counseling, whatever it might be. You've got to take the reins and take charge and do it, because if you don't, you are going to be the reason your kids, your grandkids, your great grandkids have this generational curse.
Right.
Because you've got to understand the power of you breaking those chains and breaking that cycle. Because if you don't, there's people out there, and they say it can last for many, many generations, because it goes back to what I said is normal, right? Yeah. What I'm doing every day in my home with my daughters, the way I love my wife, that is the way they're going to expect to be loved. And if I'm verbally abusive or physically abusive, stats will show you, and people will tell you, most young daughters will end up, if they grow up in an abusive environment with their dad and their mom, most of them are going to marry an abuser because that's what's normal to them. So we're setting the standard as a man, husband, and father that our daughters are going to measure every other man, husband, and father, and by which our sons are going to measure themselves as men, husband, and fathers.
Yeah.
Let me ask this. I'm sorry to step on your toes on this, Tom, but
go ahead, Eric.
One thing that I did catch in your book that kind of stuck with me, I have a son and a daughter. And as you said, you have daughters. You said that with daughters, the father wound is more of an impact, if I understood it right, is more of an impact to daughters than it is to the son because of how men and women interpret their feelings or their emotions. And again, I might be getting it off, but how do you think women or daughters are more affected than sons are in that way?
Well, so I'll say this to clarify, it affects both to the same degree. It affects them differently. There's some similarities in the sense that both men and women that grow up with father wounds, they'll have this sense of shame and guilt and unworthiness. Again, that betrayal, right? If I'm not good enough for my dad, why am I good enough for anybody? Right? It's that piece of it. But there's the differences too. For women, women as young girls want to know that they're loved, that they're cherished, that they're lovable, that some guy wants to love them, right? That they are deserving of love. Men, if they get, betrayed by their dad, it's like, man, I've got these other outlets. I'm going to go be a muscle man. I'm going to go do all these different things to show and prove to the world I'm a man. For me, it was, I wanted to prove to a dad that had been gone for many years that I could be successful, that I could be a great man, husband, and father. I was out to prove to him, who he had been gone for years. But that was this psyche, the psychological frame that I was working from. And so there's differences, but there's similarities. But women, if they don't get that love and affection and affirmation from their fathers, they're going to go find it from someone, and it's going to be another man. And in most cases, it's not going to be a good man, right? So there's that aspect to a young woman. For the men, it a lot of times, and this works for both men and women, it's addiction. It's like me. I'm going to medicate that wound because there's something, and I know it, that there's something there, but I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to really feel. I don't want to be real about the stuff I need to deal with. So I'm going to medicate it. There's the young girls and boys that cut, right? The cutting a lot of times can be the lack of affirmation or approval from a father. You got incarceration. We interviewed a lot of guys in prison, and one of the chaplains told me one time, he said, John, he said, in your movie, you say 9 out of 10 people have a father wound. He said, and here it's 12 out of 10. It doesn't matter if it's men or women or whatever. They're all in here because a lot of it's anger, and they committed these crimes and did all these things out of all this whatever. Dude, there's so much to it, and to unpack it, it gets pretty deep, and there's a lot of different facets to it that are interesting to explore. And again, even to this day, man, I'm still realizing stuff, right? I'm still discovering stuff in my own life, and I still deal with the same stuff. Again, I don't have this thing figured out, man. I still deal with some of the same stuff. I've gotten a lot better at it, but I think a lot of men can somewhat relate to this. But like for me, I'm not a handyman. I'm the most unhandy handyman you'll ever meet. And so, when something, the flapper in a toilet goes out, I can't fix it. Years ago, I used to get really frustrated and ticked off because I would think, why is my dad not here to show me this? Why didn't he teach me this, right? So I'd start getting all angry, and then I would explode on my wife and whatever. I've gotten much better at that, but I'm not saying some of that stuff still doesn't happen, where I have to catch myself and go, okay, it's not that big a deal, man. You're okay.
Yeah. I find that to be particularly problematic, and I think that's very common amongst men in general. And maybe you can affirm this: is that feeling of inadequacy for some reason for men is so extremely difficult to overcome. It's like to the point of enraging, right? You just kind of shove everyone away because you don't feel like you're sufficient. You're not competent enough, you know?
Well, so dude, here's a great, and this is what I learned from all the interviews we did. And I think John Eldredge, one of the authors in the movie, he's absolute solid and stud in the movie. And he says, he says this line of, if most men are thinking, if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. Because all my junk, all my stuff, all my things, the struggles that I have, right? And so that's what most men are thinking. I can't be real, totally transparent and authentic with other men, because if I do, you're not going to like me. Or you're going to use it against me somehow, right? It's going to become this weakness that you're going to use against me. One of the things Eldredge says in the movie for young boys, they need two things. They need to know that they're loved, that dad, I love you. They need to get that from their father. I am the apple of my dad's eye. That's what they need to know. And they need to know you have what it takes. They need to get that from their father that says you have what it takes to be a great son, to be a great man, to be a great husband. That kind of affirmation is what every man needs, those two things. And it's important because most of us are wandering through our life asking ourselves the question, do I have what it takes to be a man, husband, father?
I found that kind of common amongst a lot of the interviews with women too, was that, talk kind of going from what is integral for men to kind of what's integral for women. It seems like a lot of the women struggled with never being told by their father that they're proud of them. And I feel like those things they kind of go hand in hand, but they are a little bit different, right? One is like saying, yes, son, I'm confident in your level of competency and your ability to succeed in this world and take on the challenges that you are confronted with. But with a woman, it's kind of like, it's not about competency. It's more of like about being and character. It's like, I'm proud of the woman that you've become.
Yeah, it's almost a difference in language too. It's a young girl needs to know she's cherished and she's loved. A young boy, he doesn't really care about, so to speak.
Yeah.
He wants to know he has what it takes. That he's a good man, he's a good son, all those things. I'll tell you a great story we did with Meeker, with Dr. Meeker, relating to daughters. She tells this great story off camera when I was doing the interview with her. She said, John, she was a pediatrician by trade, and because she would have all these young women come in her office is what she actually inspired her to write the book, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. And with any guys that have a daughter, I'm telling you, it's a great book and it'll help you as a dad. But she said, I started seeing these young women coming at younger and younger ages becoming sexually active. It was 16, then 15, then 14. And she said, John, on more than one occasion, I'd have a young lady walk in my office, 13, 14 years old. I'd check her out. Everything was fine. But before she'd leave, she'd say, hey, doctor, can you write me a prescription? And Dr. Meeker go, what for? There's nothing wrong. You're totally fine. She said, I don't care what it's for, but just put at the bottom of it, cannot have sex. She said, John, what was happening was this young lady was having sex. It wasn't emotionally or physically pleasurable, nothing going on there, but it was the only positive male affection she was getting. She wasn't getting that positive fatherly love from her dad. And this prescription was her permission slip to go take to Johnny to say, hey, Johnny, I can't have sex anymore.
Wow.
So as a man, as a dad with 3 daughters, dude, I'm like, you can imagine me coming back to my house that day. I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. This is a game changer. I'm going to make sure my girls know all these different things. They're cherished. They're loved. I love them. I believe in them. I'm proud of them. I mean, I was like over the top because I wanted my girls to understand and know that they are deeply loved and cherished by their dad.
Right. I come from so go ahead if you have something to say. Feel free.
Well, the one thing that keeps getting in my head is with all this is, and I don't know why this is sticking so much in my mind, is with all this happening with like you said, the younger and younger they're being more I forget the word, but sexually active. Yes, thank you. But this father wound, so like all three of us, we obviously have a father wound. It's been clear from the beginning. What's the difference of, like, I've gotten mine's better than probably my father's was, or Tom, yours sounds like it's better than what your fathers were, and so on and so on. John, it sounds like you've worked a lot through yours. But how do we make sure as fathers that we don't pass that father wound on and become like my son? I'm very adamant not to be my biological father. I try to mimic more my stepdad. I am far from being perfect because he was one of these guys that everyone loved. He was outgoing. His father was very close to him and all of his kids, which was different and weird for me to see kind of that relationship. How do we make sure that we become more like my stepdad and his father, where you would never guess if there was a father wound in that family, to where, like, I want my son and my daughter never to say, well, obviously my dad had a father wound.
So I'll tell you, here's the reality. We're going to wound our kids, man. We just are. I've said it, right? We're fucking perfect. And now I say that to also say that I think I wound my kids less now. I wound my kids less now than I did 15 years ago, right? Because I walk in a different awareness. I'm working on myself. And again, I'm not perfect. I'm constantly, trying to do everything I can to be a better dad. I do mess up pretty, consistently.
Right.
So I have to have those conversations with my kids, but I'm a huge advocate of counseling. I think as men, you want to be a real man, go to counseling, go talk through your stuff, man, go figure it out. Because if you don't, it's going to leave a wake of destruction and craziness behind you. But it's the other part to me. I had to share my story with my girls and age appropriate. I wanted them to see, and mine were usually about 12, 13, 14 years old. When I started sharing my story, they've watched the movie and they understand. And I was real with them about my stuff, depression and alcoholism, all the things that I've struggled with, unworthiness, shame, guilt, or whatever. But in sharing my story, they've come to understand a lot of things. They're like, oh, okay, I think now that makes sense. What dad did then, how he responded to me, his anger, blah, blah, blah. It helps connect the dots when we share our story with our kids and help them understand, right? So there's that part that really alleviates that wound, if you will. And then the number two thing is we've got to learn and understand the importance of asking our kids for forgiveness, right? When I mess up, and again, I do still to this day, I grab that kiddo, and usually in private, and I say, look, I am so sorry. And I explain, here, I was having a bad day at work, or I just wasn't paying attention, or whatever the reason is. I'm honest with them and say, man, I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? Right? Because our kids need to know that, need to see what forgiveness is. Because here's the reality. We're going to need to ask for forgiveness. They're going to need to ask for forgiveness. It teaches them, it models to them what it looks like to ask for forgiveness too, right? But most importantly, here's what happens if you don't. Let's say you yell at your kiddo. Kiddo goes upstairs. They're sitting up there thinking, dad's never come up here and said anything to me. So he yelled at me. Yelling must be okay. Maybe it's right, actually. This is what my dad's showing me is what I should do. So next thing you know, your kid's yelling at her friends, right? Yelling at their friends. Your kid's yelling back at you because you didn't show them that, no, it was wrong. I screwed up. It was a mistake I made, and asked for forgiveness. So there's again, to answer your question, we're going to wound our kids, I think, through counseling and through literally walking through the journey and allowing your kids to be a part of your story and understand what you've been through. That helps tremendously.
I think you touched on two really important things, honesty and forgiveness. And so when it comes to honesty, I feel like that's been an integral part in my ability to be a good father for my 3 daughters, is to be as open and honest and real with them as I possibly can. My daughters are far apart in age. I have a 14-year-old, a 7-month-old, and a 6-month-old. So quite the gap. My 14-year-old, right, was obviously my first daughter, and she's said to me in the past, like, hey, how come you do this with my younger sister that you didn't do with me? Or how come, she gets treated this way and I got treated this way? And again, age appropriate, but I'm upfront and honest with her. I'm like, listen, kid, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but as an eldest child, you hold a really important position in this family. You were kind of my practice child. You know what I mean? I didn't have any idea what the hell I was doing when I was raising you. And, I learned so much from you, and your sister benefits from that. And it sucks and it's not fair, but it is the way it is, and you're also in a position now to be the idol and to lead by example, and to, you're the coolest person that your sisters know, so you have a huge weight on your shoulders. And, it's again, it might not be fair, but it's open, honest, and real with her. And when it comes to the forgiveness side of it, I feel like it's so important that we ask our kids for forgiveness, but it's equally as important that we forgive ourselves. When you made that comment, it was like it brought back a memory. I have a man who in my life who I really looked up to, and he said to me about parenting. He said, and you have to bleep this out there because it's important. I'm not going to censor it. He said,
Right.
he said, listen, he said, your job is not to raise perfect kids. Your job is to fuck them up as little as possible. And I was like, and I didn't understand that, and when you made that comment, and now that I've been a father for a long time, I'm beginning to understand it. When you made that comment, it brought that back. And then the other thing is Jim Rohn, who I really look up to. You listen to a lot of his stuff, and I remember thinking to myself at one point in time, like, oh man, like this guy's just got it under control. Like, why can't I be as successful as him? Why can't I just get all this stuff right? And he tells a story in one of his live conferences about someone walking up to him after the conference and saying, Mr. Rohn, like kind of almost like accusing him. Hey, you talk about all this stuff, but how are you doing with it? And he says to the guy, he says, listen, man, this stuff's really easy to talk about, but it's not easy to do. And him being honest about that with his viewers also kind of allowed me to forgive myself for my inadequacies. Like, hey, listen, the reason I'm not getting it right is because it's a whole lot easier to talk about than it is to do. And that's true for us as well, right? I mean, we all talk about this stuff, but it's easy to talk about. It's not easy to do.
I think too, you bring up a good point, the forgiving yourself piece. And that is a piece that most, I think, forget about, right? I did an interview. He's the older man in the movie, Dennis Longley, and he's 84 years old.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'd spoken at a church in Dallas, Fort Worth, and like on a Monday morning, he sends me this email. So I said, hey man, can I get a video camera and come get your story? He's like, sure. So I go sit down with him, and he said, John, he goes, I was thinking a lot about what you said yesterday. And he goes, I just really started working through it. And he goes, last night, he goes, I forgave my dad for all the things. He goes, my dad's been gone forever. I'm 84 years old. And he goes, and I asked God to forgive me, and I had to forgive myself.
Yeah.
Because of all the anger and bitterness and resentment I had toward my dad and God and whatever, right? Everybody. And he said, for the first time in his life, he went to bed at peace. 84 years old, right? So I think that the message we also have to understand here is it's never too late to find forgiveness, right? Whether we need to be forgiven, we need to ask forgiveness from our kids because of something we've done or the damage we caused or whatever it might be, or whether we ourselves need to start that journey of forgiving our own fathers and grandfathers and things of that nature. So it's important to remember.
Yeah, there's a lot about the forgiveness aspect that from your movies that I kind of picked up, and from the book that I'm, like I said, only halfway through, and I can't wait to get through the rest of it to get all this stuff in. But forgiveness is not that easy that everybody, and like for me, if you don't know you have the father wound, obviously you can't forgive. You just have that pent up anger. you yell, you drink, you do whatever. But what do you think one of the first steps people can do to try to build that forgiveness, to find the forgiveness they need? Because not everyone's going to say, let me pray to God. Let me talk to God. And I know you're pushing therapy, but it's also like, for me, for an example, and I'll be blatantly honest, is when I was younger, my mom took me to therapy after the divorce to try to deal with it. And I've always held the theory that therapists were quacks after talking with them. And
there are some quacks out there, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah. But, and to me, I'm not the talky, touchy-feely. I've gotten a lot better, and the only people that can be touchy-feely with me are the people that sleep in this house. So the fact is you're not going to see me going out hugging a lot of people. I don't talk to people. I talk to my family, and that's where my therapy, I guess, comes in, or doing this show, talking to other dads, learning. The dads that don't have that opportunity, where do you think they should start, if possible, to try to find that forgiveness in themselves?
So I think first and foremost, and you kind of alluded to it, the first and most difficult thing to do, first step, is admit you're wounded. Admit you have a wound, because most guys have no clue they even do. So it's starting to do some self-evaluation, like, okay, do I have anger issues, right? Ask my wife. You want to really get real and get into some stuff, have an honest conversation with your wife going, honey, there's this idea of a father wound. Do you think I have it? You can explain it, unpack it a little bit, but talk to your wife about it. If she's the real deal, she's going to tell you, yeah, bro, you've got something you need to start working on. But it's really starting to do some things on yourself, right? Some work on yourself and understanding the bad, unhealthy things that you do. What is that cause from? What is that, a result of, right? The way you father your kids, the way you father your kids. Now, you may think it's okay and normal. Again, asking your wife, even asking a buddy. I think there's most people don't think about this, or really guys don't like to do this. But you get a couple of guys you really trust, man, having these honest, real, authentic conversations with them about our stuff, dude, it doesn't get much better than that. And I think you will be blown away. You share a little bit of your story, your buddies who you've maybe known for 30 years go, hey, dude, I had no idea. I had the same thing. I'm struggling with the same thing right now, or they've struggled with it, right? A buddy of mine used to say, go talk to these older guys. They've paid the dumb tax already, Yeah. You don't have to pay the dumb tax. If you go talk to some of these older guys, and I could sit with older men, the grandfatherly types, for hours, dude, because I love their wisdom and their insights. And like you said, Tom, this older guy gave you this valuable information, this advice. It's doing those things, but a lot of it too is it's stepping outside your comfort zone. But is stepping outside your comfort zone, isn't that worth the fight for your family? Right? Just, I got to go step outside my comfort zone. Big freaking deal. If it's going to change the dynamic of my family, maybe change my life, my family's life, I think it's worth it.
It's interesting you talk about the idea of a comfort zone, because one of the common adage, I work in the fire service, one of the common adages in the fire service is get comfortable being uncomfortable. And, they tell you that in training all the time. Right. And obviously it relates mostly to the physicality of the job and the stress that you endure on your body. But as you're talking about this, I'm kind of like having a realization that this idea also applies emotionally. Right. If our job is, if an integral part of being a man is placing before us challenges that we're not entirely sure we can overcome, and then overcoming them. Right. That's also true emotionally for us. So when it comes to unpacking all of these father wounds that we have, or all this trauma that we have from our past, right? Part of it is kind of confronting so much of it that we're not really sure we can overcome it, and then overcoming it, right? And that's how we progress and move forward.
Yeah,
Never
we
really
can
made that connection.
man, we can do difficult things, right? We
Mhm.
can. We're men. And I think we're much stronger than we think we are in a lot of
Mhm.
cases. Now, there's a lot of guys that think they're stronger than they actually are.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That's a
I
different
think
father wound.
that's a whole nother, yeah, exactly. That's a whole nother issue. But this idea that, the humility, right? It's understanding and admitting that you have a father wound and then asking for help because, I like to say my counselor was kind of my guide. I don't know that I'd be where I'm at today if it wasn't for Dr. Tom, who's in the movie,
Right.
because he was the guy that called me out on my BS, right? When I was bluffing or trying to skirt around something, not really wanting to address whatever, but yet he encouraged me, and he was walking me through those doors that I had both hands up against, my feet up against, like, ain't no freaking way I'm going through that door. And he would walk me through it, right? And every time I would walk out of a counseling session, I was just like, wow, there was something I was blown away about. But to your point, I am a huge advocate of counselors. I think you've got to, it's the referral thing. You've got to know somebody that's got a good
Right.
one, because there's a lot of wackos out there. But I think I needed that guy to walk me through the things that I didn't even know I needed to be walked through, right? A professional that could really talk me through those things and connect the dots for me, because I think it's very difficult to do if you don't have that professional. I'm not saying it's impossible and it can't be done, but I think it's very difficult, because it's like me as just a normal dude saying, okay, I'm going to give myself brain surgery,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
It's like, I have no idea where to start, or you know what I mean? You've got to have somebody that knows what they're doing and that has dealt with this kind of stuff before. Maybe you can do it. It may take a lot longer for you to get to that place of healing and forgiveness without it. And again, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's I needed a guide, and fortunately I got a good one.
I think another option, right, aside from counseling, and again, I agree with you. I think counseling is a vital part of the puzzle, but I think another good aspect of it is fellowship, and I don't even necessarily mean in a religious way. I'm not particularly religious. I value religion highly. I consider myself more of a theologist than a religious person, but the fellowship aspect of it, so groups of men working together, right? My daughter's on the swim team, and on the back of her t-shirt it says, if you want to go far, if you want to go quick, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And never heard that quote before, and I saw that on the back of her shirt the other day, and I was like, wow, that kind of blows my mind a little bit. And it applies directly to this, right? So if you're working through these father wounds and you're working through these mental blocks that you have that have been placed before you, if counseling is not an option, or if it's not something that you're really interested in, I think fellowship is another good option, right? Groups of men that can work together on a problem, right?
I think no, I totally agree. I think we undervalue or underestimate the power of that, Tom. I think, again, back to what I said earlier, if as men, if you're willing with a couple, 2 or 3, 4, 5, 6 guys, whatever, that you trust, and you can be open and honest and real, there's a lot of really good things that can come out of that, because again, you realize a lot of these guys are going through the same thing. They may have some answers that for you, they may have some help for you, some advice for you, counsel, right? So it's definitely a good thing. I totally agree.
Now, the one thing is you mentioned in at least the book, and I forget if it was where else I heard it, but that men that have the father wound, this and that, one of the big issues is they also kind of isolate themselves. They don't have the big groups. And me, I've never been a big group friend kind of person. I've always had 3 or 4 friends. Right now I'm down to 1, and that's my neighbor across the street. My best friend in the world, I haven't talked to him in 6 months. I believe he's still alive. I make that joke, but the fact is it, and that's another thing that kind of hit me reading that. I'm like, these things are really starting to add up. So that, with that being an issue, when people realize they have that father effect and they know that they're isolating, stepping away and going to do fellowships, find religion to talk to people isn't always the easiest. At least, like I said, I'm not one to go and talk to people. I'm not touchy-feely. My grandfather was a junkyard guy. So if that gives you kind of a indication of his way, and smoke cigars and all this, right? So he tried to fit that kind of mentality, and I picked up a little bit of that, nowhere near, but I picked up a little bit of that. And the one thing I realized is, as you guys were talking, I'm not going to initially go out and, like I say, talk to people outside my house. You know, my father was a horrible dad. Wasn't there, didn't care. Like, I'll say it to you guys just because we're talking about it, but generally, guys like me aren't going to go out and talk to their friends because, like you said, what if they laugh at me? What if they say, man, you are so messed up. I'll tell you what, how about we try to get another time to get together? I'll call you. You know what I mean? It's always that thing. And like you said, my best friend in the world I haven't talked to in 6 months, I can guarantee you him and I both have father wounds. And there's no question about it. But him and I have known each other since we were probably my knee height. And not once have we ever talked about our family's issues. We've acknowledged, we joked, man, let me tell you how messed up my mom, or how my dad did this, or my stepdad, or whatever it was. We joked about it, but never once have we, and we've had tons of conversations over the decades, but we never talked about, man, I'm feeling hurt. Man, I'm feeling lost. Man, I don't know why I'm this way. We've never had that. And as far as I know, he's never had it. I know I've never really sat down and done it. What do we need to try to change that atmosphere? Because to show other men, because like I said, they're not going to do it unless they see other people doing it in all truth.
So it's interesting when I go and speak at various places, I share my story, and you know, I was the guy that for many years was really good at pretending to be somebody I wasn't. I was a fraud, a poser. I was all of that. So I was pretending to live this life that, that nobody knew about, or that I wanted everybody to believe it was a certain way. So once I had this transformation and really found forgiveness and all of this in my life, I then became, hey, here's my stuff. I'm just pretty much open and honest. Here's the stuff. Here's my junk I struggle with. Here's my story, blah, blah, blah. And there's a freedom in that, dude, that's unlike anything else. And because of that, a lot of guys, they'll wait around, and then I get to talk to them after the facts. And I've heard story after story after story, right? And I've heard some crazy stories. But the reality of it is, back to my original deal, is you're not alone. Right? As men, we're not alone. The isolation hurts us. It can be one of our greatest enemies, because when we get isolated, you get to thinking and doing things you shouldn't be doing and thinking, right? Because you think, well, nobody's going to find out about this. Nobody's going to whatever. And there's just a lot of bad things that happen from that. But there, what's so interesting and what's changed from even 10, 15, 20 years ago is the resources we have now as men are unbelievable, man. Podcasts, YouTube. I mean, it's crazy. The resources we have now versus years ago when I was trying to figure this thing out. I'm like, what? There was nothing I could go to except for other guys or counselors. So I think understanding that, if you're really serious about trying to get to a point of healing and forgiveness, it's, you got books on Audible now, right? You got YouTube. You got podcasts, you got all these different things you can really start to dig in and tap into. The one caveat, Eric, I didn't really mention is the introverts. And I take it you're probably a little bit of an introvert.
Weirdly enough, kind of, but only when it's my job not involved.
Yeah, exactly. This kind of stuff right here gives you a little bit of an extrovert feeling. But, Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff there, that a lot of resources there you can tap into to find out more about this. There's a lot of good books out there too. John Eldridge actually has one called Wild at Heart. There's a lot of really good stuff out there that can continue to help you go down the road and figure this thing out. But if you're really serious, it's have some honest conversations with your wife and even your kids. You know, I've had the conversation with my kids, hey, what can I do better? Or
Yeah.
what am I doing that you don't like, right? It's having those honest conversations that can get you there a lot quicker.
I want to say, was it Dr. I think it was Dr. Meeker in the movie that kind of brought that to light when she brought up the idea of asking your kids, like, hey, what do you need? What can I do better? Am I remembering that correctly?
There's actually another lady in there that she's talking about love, and she was actually a former drug addict. And
Oh, yeah.
she says talking
Older
about
lady,
her,
right?
Yeah.
That's who it was. Yeah.
Yeah. She says, you know, ask your daughters, what can I do for you? What do you
Yeah.
need?
Yeah.
Those type of, and that simple thing is something that I can guarantee about 99% of the dads out there that have daughters or sons have probably never asked their kids.
Yeah. That's so valuable. So going back for a second, I just had that thought. You guys both bring up really good points, right? So Eric, I think most men, especially when it comes to talking about, you know, these like really pivotal emotional experiences, are introverted. Even if you're a social butterfly by nature, I think that when it comes to these particular concepts, you have a really, really hard time talking to other people about it. And like you said, I mean, you know, I have a friend that I've been friends with since I was 5 years old, and I think only recently, within the past few years, have we really started talking about these things and unpacking these integral moments of our childhood and our early adult life that affected the men that we've become. Up until now, it wasn't even part of the conversation, and I think that's the norm. You know, I think we're the exception, not the rule. And I think John, you bring up a really good point, that we're in a position now that our fathers and grandfathers were not in. We have so many resources available to us at the tip of our fingers that they didn't have. There wasn't, you know, social groups available online to them. There wasn't podcasts and audiobooks and all this stuff available to them to help them understand and unpack all these things like we have now. And I think as men, it's our responsibility, when we make this realization that we have this emotional baggage that we need to work through, that it's our responsibility to step up and look for the resources that we need. And if it's not counseling, if it's not fellowship, maybe it's research, maybe it's podcast, maybe it's Audible, whatever it is, right? We have so many options available. As a man, it is not only is it important, but it is, again, I think your responsibility as a husband, as a father, even as a man in society, to step up and take advantage of these resources and not allow yourself to be, you know, a detriment to the world, right? Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot there to look into and try to figure out. I mean, John, where do you think it comes into with fathers needing to actually take those steps and be able to build up? I mean, at this point, to be a better father, we all want to be better dads. That, at least I hope we do. I run on the simple saying, be better so they can be better. And in my mind, my mantra of that is, everything I do, I have to do to make myself better so that I can make sure my kids have a better life. Do you find that that's equal into everything we've discussed so far, or do you think it's kind of off base?
No. I think that the key to all of it is also getting around a couple of guys that you know are good fathers, right? And having those conversations, right? Again, in this, I know we've talked about it, but it's really, we've got to get to a point as men where we're willing to be transparent and honest with other guys, and not be fearful of the consequences. Now, it's got to be guys that you have a feeling of trust with, right? Like a best friend. But I'm telling you, you will be blown away. I can almost guarantee your best friend, if you've known forever, you start talking about a few of these little things, and he's going to go, wow, I never knew that. Because here's the thing. When we first made the movie, I had guys I grew up with going, dude, they were reaching out to me. I had no idea. I had no idea. I mean, they didn't know any of my story because we never talked about it. I didn't want to talk about
Right.
it. Right?
Right.
And I had guys and girls, reaching out to me. I had no idea. And it gave me the opportunity then to share with them and help them get better, right? And help them become a little more laxed and relaxed about sharing their own story. Because here's the deal. The more we share our stories, the more others understand they're not alone. And then they're not the only jacked up, flawed, and imperfect people in this world, right? That we're all that way. But it is a matter of getting a couple of guys, one guy that you trust and that you can have some conversations with, man. That if he's your real friend, he ain't gonna bail on you because you told him something squirrely or stupid or whatever, right? If he bails, so be it. He wasn't a real friend to begin with.
Right.
Go find another dude that you can trust and have conversations with. So we've got to get past that and understand, okay, here's the deal. And how can we help each other? Because after it's all said and done, it's us helping one another, encouraging and supporting one another that can help others be better dads, men and husbands. And so it's important that we all do that and get away from this machismo and macho and I'm better and this and that and the other and I don't have any issue stuff, because that's all a lie.
Yeah, it's a good point. So some people aren't ready for it either. I mean, you talk about, I'm the weird guy in the firehouse that asks the deep questions, and around the dinner table. And it's funny because I have had people say to me, this conversation's too deep for me, and they walk away, and I'm like, well, okay, that's fine. You know what I mean? If you're not in a position to have that conversation,
you got to be okay with that,
perfectly
because
fine.
there's a lot, dude. Here's what I'll tell you. I've seen the biggest, baddest dudes on this planet. I start talking about father wounds and dads that'll weep.
Yeah.
Because you get to the heart of the issue and all those years of this anger and this wound and everything it's done to this man. It's crazy. But that's good stuff because it's helping them realize and understand and starting a journey and doing things. And again, understanding they're not alone. So there's a lot to it. Guys, I got to wrap this up. I got to get rolling.
Yep.
Yeah, I was about ready to ask you, where do you want people to find you? Where's the best way for them to reach out to you? They have questions or what so have you?
So we're at The Father Effect pretty much all over social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, the whole bit.
Perfect. I'll make sure that's all in the show notes so people can click right through to as well. Tom, where do you prefer people to reach out to you at?
So on X, right, at Earn Her Respect, my Twitter account, that's where you'll find me. You can DM me there. So.
Perfect. And for Call With Dads, obviously callwithdads.com. We're on a bunch of social medias. And one thing that we are doing that I want everyone to check out, especially homeschoolers, is check out homessor.com, HOMESSOR.com, where we have a homeschooling marketplace that we just opened up. And it's meant to hopefully in time change the way people are able to homeschool. John, I can't thank you enough for being here. I've been looking forward to talking with you for basically since we started this Call With Dads episodes, because I've been following you since then. And like I said, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, brother. Y'all enjoy.
Thank you so much.
You as well.
Jonathan.
Thank you.
See you, fellas.
Have a great day.